Will it get us more donations? Will it get us more sales leads? Will it lead to conversions? Will it drive more relevant traffic to our site, inducing the visitors to click more ads on our site, or whatever your sticky goal is that generates revenue for you? When we're talking about saving money, if saving money is your goal, which is just a variant on making money, of course, will it make our website staff more efficient? Will it cost less to get work done by outside vendors? Will our costs relating to hardware, software, office space, etc., be diminished? And will we pay less in miscellaneous expenses? Pretty straightforward questions so far. I don't think any of these are surprises to most of the folks in the room. Carl's third question can mostly be split into the camps of will it make us money or will it cost us money? He included one question related specifically to brand as a concept. I because reputational has a financial impact. There's no avoiding that. It also impacts less tangible things, though, like worker retention. So that might not be a clear cost concern, but worker retention is pretty big. So generally, the only people I have found who stay at terrible companies are those who have no other options, or those who are genuinely terrible. But none of you here are terrible because you're here and regretting it. Anyway, yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. On the mic?
Yeah, on the mic. Sorry.
I don't know. I can't see my butt, it turns out.
I think it might be turned down a little bit. People are saying it's a little choppy.
This is awkward. Can you turn my knob?
Yes.
It didn't seem to want to turn.
Weird. I'm going to turn it off. If you want to just hold on to this. I am having someone come in and check.
Okay.
But in the meantime, if you want to use a handheld microphone.
I will use a handheld microphone. I'm still going to put this back in my pocket because I've wired it into my shirt and it's just going to get hilarious if I try to take it out. Oh, turn it off, yes.
Thank you.
Hello. I feel like a lounge singer now. I have no idea how I sound, so I hope this works for people who are listening. If you see me starting to drop the mic, you should probably tell me, because I just want to put my hands in my pocket. Okay, sweet. All right, so back to the remaining questions I have on the slide here. Again, about protecting the brand. Will it put us ahead of our competition? Will it shield us from adverse economic conditions? That's an interesting one. Will it help us eliminate excess debt? Will it help us gain more free access to credit? Will it help us comply with regulations? Interesting one again coming out of Eve's talk. Will it help us break into emerging markets? Also interesting coming out of Eve's talk. Those are ones sort of, I'm suggesting you put a pin in those because those might be relevant in a little bit. Will it shield us from corruption and mismanagement? Will it help us avoid harm to the brand? And will it help shield us from litigation, which again kind of ties into a couple of these other ones. So there are plenty of articles that detail the cost of fixing bugs in production. They're out there, they've been out there for years. How typically they point out that it's an order of magnitude different to solve it in development than to fix it when in production. Again, there are many articles out there. Accessibility issues are bugs. I think we can all generally agree that that's the way to treat them, probably the safest way. So instead of running through all of the existing articles forever, I've just grabbed the most recent one, and by most recent, I mean like within the last week or two. Partly because it's going to be harder for a bad actor to dismiss a brand new article that supports the older articles. It'll be harder to dismiss that as being old and out of date and not current with trends and other things, or unrelated even to modern development practices. And for what it's worth, this is for all values of modern that really mean a 6-month-old framework named a common noun or adjective. Really? I have it, that's a laugh line. Come on, somebody throw a terrible framework name at me. Yeah, sure, we'll go with Angular. Angular's an adjective, and it's terrible. Okay, I'm just gonna keep moving forward because I'm just, yeah. Sorry, you're my plant now. What? That is a verb. I did artificially limit it. Is panic a framework? It should be. I think panic should be a framework, coming how I'm feeling now. Okay, so quick case study. I'm using this article that I've got linked up there, which I'll read in a moment, from Juanita Flessis, formerly Juanita George, formerly also of Navy Federal Credit Union, and Michael Burvell, CEO of Test Party, who is doing a talk here. You can probably find him in the hall. He's not in here. I mean, he made the right call. So I want to be clear that I am not endorsing Test Party, its product, its services, nor its business model. Just want to get that out of the way. This is linked from my website, though. Links will be available at the end. The article is The True Cost of Inaccessibility and Why Metrics Matter More Than Ever. And it was published April 23rd. Juanita likes metrics. I like that about Juanita. She feels accessibility leaders need to understand 4 metrics in particular. I've ordered them to spell COPS because I like unnecessary acronyms. So we've got customer metrics, which reveal whether you meet user needs. Operational metrics, which measure the efficiency of teams and tools. Product metrics, which show how changes impact offerings. Strategic metrics, which link to growth, market expansion, or employee satisfaction. Again, COPS is just fun to say. I can almost imagine a theme song for it. It's got a good beat. So what they did is they identified a $2,480 accessibility bug, single bug, which is the cost of, again, that single issue in the backlog. The way that she's broken it down, $1,000 of direct labor related to developers, QA, managers, and auditors. $500 of backlog holding cost, which basically relates to delays and risk exposure. $680 of opportunity cost. What could you have built instead of going back and fixing this thing? And $200 of indirect costs, which relate to legal, brand, and customer churn risks. Now, if you think, how big is your organization? At any given time, how many issues are sitting in your backlog? How many are sitting in your queue? I see people wincing. That makes me feel good and terrible. So do you have 100 issues sitting in your queue? 100 issues, by the way, doesn't seem like a high number based on a lot of the clients or other engagements I've had. Why are you looking at me like that? No. Okay. I'm just going to run with 100 issues because the math is easy and I don't want to do math. Anyway, with 100 issues at $2,480 per accessibility bug, that's $250,000 sitting in your backlog. That's a not insignificant number. I mean, it should be a not insignificant number. Juanita then flips this around and discusses how much money you can make or arguably save by hiring a dedicated accessibility human. It's weird, I keep using the word human when I'm talking about resources. Anyway, that's a whole separate conversation. So she argues it's a 9,924% return on investment. That's an almost 10,000% return on investment. That's awesome. I want to invest in that program. So the average salary, I didn't bother to go through and figure out where she came up with the numbers, but the average, and I assume fully loaded salary here, is $155,052. Average issues prevented per year by that person, 6,816. Again, I leave it to you to go into the article to get more detail on this. Cost per issue avoided, she says $2,280, and the total cost savings, more than $15.5 million. Right, that's a good chunk of money. That's a good chunk of money an organization can save. Obviously, this depends on the scale of the organization. I don't know why, though, the issues on this slide are $200 cheaper than on the previous slide. I just copied it from the article. Hi there. Oh, you want this one? This is going to be so awkward. Hold that for me.
I got you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Oh, I have to see my notes, otherwise I'm going to start rambling. And I assure you that ends in tears. No, that's okay.
Live production, everybody.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it, so I just...
I'm sorry, you addressing the $200 difference?
Because the issue of prevented, so maybe
So I appreciate you trying to qualify it, but I suggest people read the article because she may have put together a really good argument, and it would be poor form of me to say, Juanita, your math is bad.
Hello.
She's an Australian now, so I think I'm safe. So anyway, like I said, I'm just regurgitating the numbers that I grabbed from the article. But either way, a $1 spend on an accessibility human can save $100. I mean, that's kind of what we're going for here. It's a compelling argument. If you take Carl's post from 2011 and Juanita's posts spanning 15 years, I think that kind of nicely bookends a run of time that covers recent memory for most of your stakeholders. Stakeholders is a really generic term, and I'll break that up a little bit later. But for people who are interested in the money, there's 15 years there we're covering to say, do the thing, do the work. It saves you money. And again, I said stakeholders. Really, I'm talking about whoever makes the decision that gets the work done. And I kind of want to pepper some of my own examples in here in order to feel like I've contributed to my own talk. So I'm going to throw in the Indiegogo logo graphic, which is only funny if you've ever visited the Indiegogo site with a screen reader. Because the first image you land on is the Indiegogo logo graphic. I can't even say it. I think you need to be drunk to say it. Anyway, a few years ago, I wrote about trying to give to an Indiegogo logo campaign. And the fields that wanted to take my money had broken label elements. Like they had label elements, but the for attribute was just wrong or absent. It's still wrong. So nearly every field in the screen reader was announced as edit has autocomplete. Edit has autocomplete. Edit has autocomplete. I had the video in here originally. I was going to make you listen to the whole thing, but it would have been terrible. And somebody would have cried, and it probably would have been me. Anyway, none of the fields had an autocomplete attribute anyway, so the browser was also trying to fill in the gaps and make a guess about what each field was for, which is why every field on this page is filled out with my name. Full name, Adrian Roselli. Street address, Adrian Roselli. City, Adrian Roselli. Postal code, Adrian Roselli. I am a country of me. Population 0, oddly. So this is the kind of thing that you don't want the browser to try to improvise. It was still broken a year and a quarter after I filed a bug with Indiegogo logo, and they marked my bug report as resolved pretty darn quickly, but they kept the bug out there, which was weird. I kind of want to turn this into a techno track. Indiegogo logo, Indiegogo. Anyway, I blogged about this. People shared it. Folks on Hacker News made fun of me for my math and how I structured it. You can read this at any point and make your own decisions about my math. But the fundamental truth is there was a huge problem here. Indiegogo got a reputational hit from this as well because people were now going in and trying it out. They wanted to see how the page was coded. They wanted to try it with a screen reader or even voice control. So this was a negative hit to the reputation, in case that wasn't clear. As far as I know, nobody dropped a track from this. So essentially the label element in this case, I did math that said it was worth $18 million. It's not great math, but it's math. So like I said, it's questionable. I figured that Indiegogo had raised nearly $600,000 between April 2018 and April 2019. I took a percentage of the population with visual impairments, non-blind screen reader users, gave up with voice and mobility because I just didn't have good numbers and I was lazy that day. So I figured about 3% of Indiegogo users were affected. 3%. I came up with $18,433,300, which is how much more Indiegogo fundraisers lost access to because of one HTML element. So these are campaigns using Indiegogo who didn't have access to arguably that much money. Indiegogo logo takes a minimum 5% fee from all funds raised, which means that Indiegogo logo left $921,665 rather on the table. So nearly $1 million. Now, Juanita had suggested an accessibility bug was around $2,480. I found one accessibility bug worth $18 million. So, you know, there's arguably some money to be made here. There's money left on the table, money to be made, etc. But mostly I have talked about making money and saving money. And I'm going to trip on my own backpack, which would be hilarious. We haven't talked about brand. What about brand? Which, frankly, as I've said before, brand still boils down to money. So let's use a recent example and think about how this brand was affected. Does anybody want to guess what my example is going to be if it's recent? Oh, see, that's too easy. That's too easy. I mean, that is even more recent than what I've got. But I didn't have time to go into more detail, and Craig Abbott did a pretty good job anyway, and previous stuff I've done. So instead, Figma Sites. So maybe you've heard of Figma. I understand it's popular. Last week, this multi-billion-dollar company launched Figma Sites. It allows you to publish a website directly from your Figma design file, or your drawing of a website, as I like to call it. And it has parallax. So before the end of the day, anybody with an automated accessibility checker had done the barest checks already, and that anybody was me and a handful of other people. So the demo site, I have a picture up here. The demo site showed 210 WCAG violations according to the Axe DevTools, showing it here, which from my experience, Axe DevTools underreports. They get about 15% of a hit rate is from my own testing. So there might be 1,400 WCAG violations on this page that they showed off at their big event with their product launch and announcement, right? That's not insignificant. The next day, Kevin Powell, he's a CSS guy. He has about 1 million followers on YouTube. He posted a video with the title, "Figma Sites is worse than you might have thought." He's a fan of Figma. He's talked up Figma before. He started talking on one of the social platforms about how he was now looking at PenPot, which is a competitor to Figma. I have no relation to PenPot. I have no experience with them, but I'm sure they're lovely people. But the point is, that's a pretty big reputational hit from your big product launch and announcement. Some of the problems included implementations so bad that designers and CSS pros were dunking on them. Like, not accessibility practitioners. Like, Kevin Powell is not an accessibility guy, and he did a video, and he's not the only one who did a reaction video. This case on the screen is a drop cap using background colored underscores to space out the surrounding text so it wraps around the giant letter I. So that first image is a much larger first letter, and it spans 4 lines of text. The dev tools show that the space for the large letter is made from spans of underscores pushing the words out, styled to match the background color so that they appear visually invisible. Underscores. It's as if it was done with a typewriter. Those of us who were old enough to use typewriters are like, oh, I know this technique. Of course I would do this in modern web development. So this is the kind of thing that offends accessibility practitioners, CSS practitioners, HTML people, people who love typewriters. Me, typographers were upset at this. This also is a big accessibility bug. So this is one of those cases where their premier product launched and had such a big, poorly done thing that here we are as practitioners being able to look at this and say, this is uniting. We all hate this together. How can we leverage this kind of thing? So its target audience, designers are dunking on it, CSS coders, etc. This is an opportunity, this is an example of an opportunity if you're a practitioner to get ahead of this within your organization before your designers all encode this into their workflow. Anyway, this harms, I think if you're Figma, you have to recognize that this very public dunking from across the industry also harms the perception of your other offerings and other announcements that you made during that big product showcase. Like, it's not just accessibility practitioners. I really want to reinforce that. Anyway, I'd say that this screenshot alone is a business case for making sure you do it right the first time. Okay, so I'm going to pivot out of the business case. I'm also going to check the time to see how I'm doing. We're not over. So coming out of the business case is an entire category on which I think we need to spend a good deal of time, and that's risk. Primarily the risk of litigation. And it's important to consider this against the backdrop of the federal government's efforts to end all DEI&A. And if you saw Eve Hill's session, you already know about this. On the screen is an excerpt of a memo from Pam Bondi, U.S. Attorney General, dated February 5th, 2025. And the relevant bit that I'm going to read to you, and I'm sorry that some of you are probably going to be very unhappy hearing this. You already know this, but it's important we acknowledge it. Ending illegal DEI and DEIA discrimination and preferences by March 1, 2025, consistent with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm actually just going to skip through it. Basically, she's threatened to go after corporations, companies, organizations, et cetera, that have DEI&A efforts. And that has already had a chilling effect on our industry. It's led to job losses. I know people who have been fired as organizations have panicked and tightened up. It has ended some careers. I know people who just stopped. They retired early. They said, I'm out. This is just the last thing for me. And this is, of course, in addition to the impact this has on disabled people, right? This is a huge hit for everybody. And this is the risk that many organizations are looking at today. And I'm not a real fan of this risk. So while the Attorney General might be threatening to go after organizations with these efforts in place, that doesn't change the fact that there is already case law supporting website accessibility. Under ADA, ADA doesn't have anything in it about accessibility, but there's case law, about web accessibility rather. But there is case law. That still exists. That is still out there. It also doesn't change the fact that states have their own accessibility legislation in place. So there's a balancing act that we will have to consider when we're framing risk. Because at some level, we don't want our stakeholders to panic because the feds might come after them just for trying, but we do want to flag good old-fashioned litigation as a risk. And that can come from local, state, federal, and international laws. And I feel a little bit weird going too deeply into this because I think Eve did a really good job framing this, that litigation is, private litigation is a more costly risk than federal litigation. So I'm going to breeze through some of these a little bit. And every now and then I'm going to remind you, like I'm about to do now, I am not an attorney. It's just always important to say that because sometimes I say things and people think I have a clue. I got one thumbs up. That's a good sign. That was from an attorney who's grateful I'm not an attorney. Anyway, check with your local municipalities for any existing digital accessibility laws. I'm not wading into every city, which is why I've only picked one. When you do find them, they are usually only about the municipal site. So it's very tightly scoped. And if you're not working in municipal government, you might say, it doesn't really affect me, but you should still keep your mind on it because it also affects purchasing decisions and things like that. I'm from New York, so I'm going to start with New York, and again, keep pretty limited to New York. Should qualify, I'm actually from Buffalo, but Buffalo backtracked on all of its municipal legislation after I lost them as a client to Civic Plus in 2018. I'm not actively shitting on Civic Plus. I'm just saying it's a thing that happened. I'm not bitter. Oh boy. I'm going to hear about this one. Anyway, City of New York Local Law 26 of 2016 directs city agencies to meet WCAG 2.1 at level AA. And more recently, Local Law 12 of 2023 required a 5-year accessibility plan from city agencies. A 5-year accessibility plan. Continuing with New York, if I roll it up, there have been state laws for a number of years. I recall sitting in a workshop with state regulators in the 20-teens, or maybe early, had to be the 20-teens, maybe the 20-aughts, where they insisted that PDFs were the future of accessibility. New York State. Anyway, New York Senate Bill S3114A requires state agencies to meet WCAG, specifically the most current version of WCAG. I actually like that they write that into the law, the most current version. I couldn't find where it said to what specific level, but I'm going to assume level AA. I didn't spend as much time diving into this because, again, I'm not an attorney. Grateful expressions, okay. However, Ken Nakata is an attorney, and he does a monthly legal update. And that update includes a bill tracker, and I encourage you all to legal updates, state laws in particular. I have on the screen here an update from April, which was published on May 5th. So it recaps everything that happened in April. Again, it doesn't include all states. He only tracks movement, what is changing, what has shifted. And again, talk to an attorney versus me. Yeah, so 5 states that are covered here. I'll move through them relatively quickly. We've got Colorado, which requires insertion of a new clause holding vendors liable for inaccessible IT to public schools. Like, that's a pretty good one. That passed both houses and now is waiting signature. New Mexico requires WCAG 2.1 AA for state agency websites by April 1, 2026, and creates a new office to support it. Unfortunately, while it passed, it got vetoed by the governor, but the votes were such that that veto should be overturned and it should still happen. I'm not an attorney. I can't read tea leaves, but I feel like the numbers bear that out. New Jersey requires state agencies to meet WCAG AA and proposes the state chief technology officer create a certification process for state agency websites. We like certifications to some extent. So this passed the Senate and March 18, 2024 has been referred to committee. Hopefully that will land and be real. Pennsylvania requires public entities to create a plan for meeting WCAG by July 1, 2028. That was just introduced. That's a ways out before anything happens. And Virginia requires vendors to, these are all proposed. I really should have qualified. All of these are proposed. Proposing to require vendors to provide a VPAT/ACR and for vendors to submit a plan for closing any gaps. The governor has approved that as of March 24. So there's some movement here. And again, I keep calling back to Eve Hill, who did a good job of saying, look at your local stuff because they might be the ones carrying the water. And I see a question from Chi?
So,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. So I wanted to ask if you could repeat where everyone could find these updates.
I'm drinking. Yes, all of these will be on my site. Actually, if you go to my website now, it should be the first post on the homepage. I have a QR code at the end I will share. I didn't do that in advance because what I find people do is they stop paying attention to me and look at my site, which frankly, if you're going to stop paying attention to me, you should be looking at something more fun. Things I say that maybe I should keep in my head. Okay, so federal. So there are, of course, still U.S. federal laws on the books. They may persist. Reasonable to hope that they will. Section 508, making ICT accessible for federal agencies, also requires the federal government to purchase technology that's accessible. Section 504 prevents programs receiving federal funds from discriminating against disabled people. Federal agencies tend to apply it to their activities as well, such as digital content and tools. I mentioned before, ADA is silent on web accessibility, but case law under ADA is not. Last year, DOJ published a rule applying ADA to state and local government sites and apps. And then there's the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, which addresses captioning, audio descriptions, and more. Air Carrier Access Act got an update addressing kiosks and certain kinds of web content. Again, not an attorney. International, I'm just skipping Canada because we've already got a pretty straightforward assertion that Canada will be a state.
Too soon.
Okay. So I want to be careful expounding on the European Accessibility Act because this isn't a legal talk. There's some panic and scrambling going on. Not an attorney. If your organization wants to do business in Europe, or at least do business in Europe without getting fined, you'll probably want to follow it. The fun part is that each country gets to choose how to judge and enforce the law, which, you know, that should be interesting. DQ has gathered some of the authorities responsible for monitoring compliance. This is not an exhaustive list. And how long does this talk go? Until when? So I've got how much more time? Oh, great. Because I misread the clock and that was me panicking. Again, not an exhaustive list. This is a quick list. I have a link to the DQ page, but up there we've got, they list Austria, Czechia, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Netherlands, Slovakia, and Spain, and it lists the entity and essentially what their remit is. I think the more compelling part, though, is that DQ also gathered a short list of fine amounts. So as we discussed a while back, being inaccessible can cost money, though these costs are probably less than the potential revenue from, you know, being in those markets, right? You go to the market and make the money versus just, and be accessible versus don't be accessible, go to the market and lose a bunch of money. So Austria, their fines range up to 80,000 euros. Czechia, 400,000. France, 300,000. Germany, 500,000. Hungary's is interesting. 1,261,164 euros. It's a weird number. I'm sure it means something. Or 5% of annual net turnover. Italy is looking at 40,000 euros, or for private entities that fall within a specific law, 5% of turnover. Netherlands, 103,000 euros. Okay. 200,000 for Slovakia, 1 million euros for Spain. Like, these are not insignificant amounts, and each of these countries arguably gets to choose a little bit differently how they're going to apply it. So it's not just how much you pay, but also why you're paying it. So, you know, get ahead of this if you want to do business in Europe, which arguably is a good place to do business because they have money. People in Europe, I mean, and the continent. Okay. Now, obviously, there are more countries than in Europe. It would be pretty silly of me to just stop there, or for any organization to only consider Europe or America's hat. I am less of an attorney in all of these other countries. Lainey Feingold has done a really good job of capturing international laws. She put the call out forever ago, and people in those countries provided a ton of useful information to her. Various states of updatedness, so as always, you know, be cautious. I've only excerpted a few here, but definitely go check out Lainey's Global Law and Policy page, which is also linked from my site. So I've listed Kenya, Nigeria, Hong Kong, Japan, India, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Mexico, Brazil, and it's still only a handful. It is more likely than not that if your company or organization does business that isn't specifically US focused, that any one of these might be a market that interests you in some way. And you want to go there and not have to pay money in fines. Okay, I'm going to do a very hard pivot here because I think I've talked the business cases to death, and like I said, I was hesitant to anchor on legal too long because you don't follow an Eve Hill talk with a legal update. That's a terrible idea. So remember that trying to make and save money at some level it's inherently selfish. Not necessarily bad, but it's selfish. And it's time we looked at the people within an organization, specifically the people who might not be as motivated by huge profits or savings because they might get none of it themselves. They might be too far down in the organization, but they might very much be motivated by their own ego, preferences, and desires. So yeah, away from numbers into humans, specifically squishy humans. So I'm going to talk about stakeholders in these slides, but our goal here is to target people who make the decisions on projects. I'm calling them the HIPPO, or highest paid person's opinion. I'm just going to refer to them as a class of people. We can try to appeal to their empathy in all sorts of ways, but we know that empathy often isn't enough, and in some cases they don't have any. So we're not going to make any headroads on empathy. We're going to try to appeal to their inherent self-interest. Their selfishness that is not tied to money, but generally to hassle, convenience, and everything being about them. Selfishness. Okay. So many of you, I'm going to do sort of a remedial thing again, because everybody here knows this. I'm going to call it remedial. These disability types, you know them. The categorization that I've run through is imprecise, but they're blindness, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, speech, physical and intellectual and cognitive. I almost said Indiegogo logo again. I'll run through each briefly. We can get a baseline because we're going to build on this a little bit later. And one of our, that's one of the goals, build on these. Also, remember how I said I'm not an attorney? I'm also not a medical professional. Qualify that as well. So these next few slides are going to be addressing medical and social considerations. I bet at least a few people in this room know more about these than I do, which is great because I'm not going to know everything, and this can be handy for participation later. Okay, I'm going to run through these. Blind user cannot see what's on their screen, might seem obvious, but thinking this through is important. Most users don't think twice about how they're ingesting or interacting with the content on their screen. That underlying code is moot to most users. This isn't the case for blind users because they tend to rely on screen readers, and those ingest the code and argue or hopefully don't barf it back up on them. So they're also most likely a keyboard user. I'm lumping gestures in there with keyboard users. This means that any functions we might perform with a mouse would also need to be operable with a keyboard, or at least a keyboard-like interface. And some use braille displays, which makes brevity important too, especially when you consider the cost of braille displays. These users tend to rely on HTML, headings, proper form elements, links, landmarks, and more. And I include 3 causes of blindness on this slide, sort of to get you thinking about the people behind these things I'm talking about. I list congenital blindness, diabetic retinopathy, and injury, which suggests a person can be born blind or acquire it later in life, with all the vagaries of experience and expectations that brings. Now, low vision users I have distinct from blind users, talking about things like cataracts, color blindness, macular degeneration, photophobia. Those are just some examples. Their vision typically can't be corrected, so they might even be legally blind. But they may flip on high contrast mode or rely on other color adjustments. They may scale text. They may use a screen magnifier. They might use a screen reader. They might use all of these things at once. And it's amazing how many testers I've run into who've never considered that. As such, there might be overlap in both needs and affordances with the blind user community. Some people might not be able to hear at all, or they might have some kind of hearing impairment. This means any cues or information communicated by sound alone might be missed. The examples I listed here, deafness, Meniere's disease, otosclerosis, perforated eardrum. Otosclerosis is a conductive hearing disorder where the bones of the ear do not vibrate properly, which is a little bit different from Meniere's disease, a disorder of the inner ear. And in Meniere's disease, that can also cause vertigo, tinnitus, hearing loss, feeling of congestion in the ear. And I'm carving these out because we tend to, I don't want us to think of these as sort of binary, either you're deaf or you don't hear well, but they're like other things associated with other impacts. Anyway, these users, for example, might struggle with captions if they aren't well synchronized. Their first language might even be sign language, not English or whatever the native language of the site is. And they tend to rely on good captions, visual cues, even haptic cues. Someone with a speech disability might be able to speak less clearly than others, or they might be completely nonverbal. I've listed as examples apraxia of speech, which is a speech sound disorder affecting an ability to translate conscious speech into motor control. Another example is cluttering, which is a cognitive aspect that relates to speech planning and thought articulation. I also list nonverbal and stuttering as examples. These users might find voice interfaces and voice control to be far more difficult. They might not be able to place a phone call for additional help. As such, they tend to rely on other interactions, and they may also use assistive technologies such as TTY or text relay. I appreciate you all hanging through some of the remedial bits. There are many forms of physical impairment, such as mobility or dexterity issues. As examples, I've listed epilepsy, Parkinson's, quadriplegia, vestibular disorders. For web accessibility, we tend to focus on motor control and the inability to use 2 hands at once. These most affect interaction with a device. That's why we tend to think about them. Large hit areas and simple interactions are ideal in those cases. And as with all disabilities, the severity can change over the course of a day or over just the course of an experience. Users might have specialized hardware such as a chin wand, mouth mouse, one-handed keyboard, foot pedals, and so on. They might also use voice control tools and screen readers. Intellectual and cognitive disabilities affect far more than the sensory disabilities I've covered, and they tend to be invisible, and in some cases they are undiagnosed. There's a variety of reasons for cognitive barriers, and there's also a corresponding range of effects. My sadly brief list, because I've only got 4 there, includes ADD, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and a broader learning and language category, because I was going to try to break that down and then I panicked because of time. To give a broad range of effects, I'm going to categorize them as memory, problem solving, attention, reading / linguistics / verbal comprehension, math comprehension, and visual comprehension. So these users may use a screen reader, they might use dictation software, any assistive technologies that I've mentioned so far might be part of their toolkit. And they tend to rely, as many people do, on well-structured context written in plain language and with good supporting content. So I've put all these to, I've separated all these, but I want to sort of pull them together because it's important to know that many disabilities come in sets. I mentioned Meniere's disease earlier. That affects hearing as well as balance. Many others functionally cause other disabilities. For example, if you consider a wheelchair user who relies on a mounted display, for as long as they're using that mounted display, they might be functionally low vision unless it's mounted at a good or typical viewing distance. These disability sets, as I call them, can also shift and change throughout the course of a day, or context, or experience, or whatever. And they can all be affected by mood, experience, comfort, and more, which also means we need to be careful about stereotyping and generalizing disabilities because of the incredible broad range of impacts and effects. So for example, low vision, whenever we're talking about low vision when we're working on projects, that can mean legally blind. It could be light sensitive, no peripheral vision. It can be a lot of different things. And it's very easy to just say low vision and move ahead as if it's a binary category. It's not. There's a whole lot more going on under the hood. Because as I keep learning, no two people are alike. I keep trying to make them alike, and they refuse. So, sorry?
We get cranky when you do that.
I know, it's weird. I think it's the vice grip. Yeah, squeezy. So I've done the obligatory thing here where I steal this image from Kat Holmes from the Inclusive Design Toolkit. It's a group of stick figures representing different disability scenarios. It shows someone with an arm in a sling, a skier with a cast on their foot, a bartender working a cocktail shaker, a wheelchair user, someone holding a baby, an opera singer, always thought that was interesting, someone with a cane and dog, a pregnant person, and so on. There's a bunch in there. But this image gets used so much because it shows the overlap between permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. The core concept here is that if you can solve for one disability, you can extend that to everyone, ideally, who experiences it at any time, on any timeline, whenever, under any context. So if you're designing for people with permanent disabilities, it actually results in designs that benefit people universally. This is a known thing to us. I'm rehashing a lot of things that you're aware of. But the concept of selfish accessibility is meant to flip that. Because we're going to design for the hippo first. Yeah, without them recognizing it, of course. We don't want them to know that we're using them and their selfish tendencies and preferences as a proxy for a disability that we're targeting. Businesses like it when we use the word leverage, don't they? Okay, so I'm going to try to draw some of these parallels here. Here's a selfish case that affects all hippos, or at least those who persist in living. Dark room. You're all like, yeah. Why? Vaguely uncomfortable now. Thought you all to be horrified, but nope. Anyway, getting older affects nearly everybody, and it carries risks and side effects, as I keep discovering. And as I have noted in every version of this talk that I've given, getting older is not for the young. They should have warned me about that. And it's proven by how old I've gotten since I started giving this talk. So this image shows a short tiled wall, and sitting at one end are a young man and woman holding bags and talking to each other. Sitting at the other end, an older man and woman holding bags and talking to each other. They're separated by about 5 feet and probably 40 years, right? But they have the same goals. In this case, it might be trying to pick where they're going to go to get lunch. Their needs are different, but because one couple might prefer a shorter walking distance or a place with fewer people or somewhere without stairs and maybe a lot more lighting. So, same goals, different needs. This image shows a round metal bench on a public pier. An elderly woman is reading from a paperback book with a bag at her feet, and a young woman is reading from her phone with her bag on her lap. Again, similar goals of reading without being hassled. One is more technologically adept, however. Here's your chance to guess which one it is. Thank you. Because the solar-powered device, right, has a clear affordance of progress built right into the content. You can see how thick one side is versus the other. It's waterproof. It can survive a drop from like 3 feet. It won't leak your data. Weird stuff can't be installed on it. So yes, the book is arguably the more technologically. Okay, I'm losing people. Cool. One of them almost definitely, though, appreciates the bright sunlight. The other one probably not so much. And so there's a difference in affordances and needs. Right there is a good example. The sunlight can be a problem for one, but a help to the other. Similar goals, different needs. Recurring theme. Now, even if your hippo is unfortunate enough to get older, wow, there are still accidents. And now that I have a sense of this room, I'm not suggesting that you should be the person who makes accidents more likely for your hippo, because that would be illegal. Can I? I'm sorry?
Well, your backpack, you were trying to trip yourself up.
I was, but I have issues with myself. And I'm not well paid, so you know I survived it. I'm also making sure that that legal counsel is looking at me with wariness, because hurting people is bad.
I'm glad we cleared that up here.
Just wanted to make sure that's on the record. Anyway, accidents come in all forms. I have personally had broken limbs, eye injuries, hearing injuries, head trauma, and there are others with myriad of side effects, and those impacts typically require some form of affordance. Did it flip? It did flip. Okay. Here's a forearm wrapped in a fabric sleeve with a plastic splint, and Velcro straps are holding it in place. The forearm is resting on a pillow. The splint is more than you might need for a repetitive stress injury, I'm guessing. But taking one hand out of action can really slow down your computer use, or at least for most people it can, particularly if the hand that's gone out of action is your mouse hand. It could also require you to change where and how you sit. You might not be able to rest it well on a desk. If it's a more serious injury, then you might be in a situation where you have to learn how to use a one-handed keyboard for a long period of time. Don't know. Even if one-handed keyboards are compelling and interesting and make your coworkers say, "What's that?" and "How do I get it?" Are those Tic Tacs? Because you are ostensibly from an injury likely to heal. I mean, that is our goal. I had nothing to do with the injury, so yes, you should get better, because I'm thorough. Anyway, you'll never regain efficiency until you're fully healed is the gist here. Here's a close-up of a man's face. One eye is covered in tape and a protective eye patch. The metal is poked with holes so the eye can breathe, because eyes do breathe. Sometimes they scream. If you have eye surgery or just poke yourself with a fork, this could represent you. This is why I always keep a cork on my forks. Anyway, even if it's your bad eye, you're going to have a problem here with depth perception. Right off the bat, you're down one eye, depth perception is going to be off. You're probably going to struggle with operating your phone. If you wear glasses, the glasses might no longer sit right. They might not even fit over the eye patch, depending what it is. You will be functionally a new low vision user. Welcome. And then you're a low vision user who also has depth perception problems. This photo is looking up a steep hill as 7 men are in various states of falling, running, and tumbling as they chase a wheel of cheese that is bouncing high ahead of them. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Cooper's Hill Cheese Rolling and Wake. there's like Netflix, I think it was, did a whole show on this, and I've been using this slide for years because again, this is a rehash of an old talk. So I was thrilled that they did it, and it was nice to hear them verify some of the things that I found out. In particular, participants are arguably of sound mind and body when they start, when they gather at the top of this incredibly steep hill, and somebody throws an 8-pound wheel of double Gloucester cheese down the hill, because I don't think anybody eats it. They're just getting rid of it. I don't know. And then people chase it, and there's a fleet of ambulances waiting for them at the bottom. They've had to break it up into heats because there aren't enough ambulances to take people to the hospital at the end of a run. So they do a heat, drive the injured away, come back, do another heat. So every year there are, this is for about 200 years they've been doing this thing. 600 unofficially documented years they've actually been doing this. I don't know if all the original cheese is still down there. I don't know if cheese turns into trees if you wait long enough. Anyway, these people are willingly collecting disabilities in search of cheese. I mean, that's fascinating to me. Most of the disabilities here are mobility, most of them, not counting the ones that led to them to make this terrible decision. Now, if, like me, your hippo thinks that they're invincible and allergic to nothing, there are still situational impairments to consider. Multitasking I have here is the first one. It's an easy one since nobody can actually multitask. Anybody who says that is a liar. They'll just rapidly and inefficiently task switch, which functionally creates a cognitive impairment. Sunlight can mess with visibility on screens. Trying to eat while working can limit your mobility, especially if you get seeds under the keys and they won't depress anymore. You have to pull them off for the next hour in the Zoom meeting and everybody sees you. What are you doing? Not having headphones for a Zoom call, that means that your participation is probably pretty limited. And if the content is in a different language, then you have a de facto language barrier as well. I'm going to set the microphone down for a moment while I get a drink of water. But that's where it wants to be. That's what it told me. I mean, we had a chat before we started. Yeah, I mean, couldn't you tell? Did you see the little, the black thing got bigger? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It wasn't limp. Anyway. Oh, you heard that. Okay, so here is a guy working at his computer holding a sandwich in his left hand. His right hand is on the keyboard. The mouse is alone to the side of it. In my career, I have found that the best way to become a proficient keyboard user is to eat lunch while I'm working. Always have food in your mouse hand, really is what it comes down to. It won't make you a touch typist, but you'll probably learn keyboard commands relatively quickly while swearing. Here, two men are sitting cross-legged on a blue tarp in a park. They're sharing a short collapsible wooden table which holds their computers. Both are also on their phones, and one is smoking. They are stacking situational impairments here. I mean, it's just like they have a checklist they're working their way through. So mobility impaired while using their phones and the cigarette, cognitively impaired from the task switching, visually impaired from the sunlight on their screens. I'm going to say that the blue tarp is probably also affecting their color perception, because that's bright. I mean, these guys know how to do it. Here's a guy sitting at a counter in a Starbucks. He has a video camera plugged into his laptop, as well as headphones, and a series of user manuals for video editing are sitting alongside it. He probably doesn't have a home office. His situational impairment here is almost definitely hearing, because between the crowd, the coffee grinder, the steamer, etc., those headphones are a necessity. Probably can't get anything done without it. I know some folks, and probably a few hippos, who work from home, and disturbing your partner is always a risk. Here, a man is sitting up in bed working on his laptop. He's holding a mug of coffee. On the bed with him and partly under the blankets is a large gray dog. His legs are stretched and dog is slightly dozing. The coffee and the dog make kind of a double risk factor here. Too much movement, risky, and it's one-handed movement at that. Too much noise from the laptop, you could startle the dog and you're back to the risk of the coffee over the laptop. So at least here the room is already lit, and but I don't know how bright that is on the laptop. Now, in the old days, checking in for a flight while in a foreign country was a hassle. I experienced this a few times. If your mobile phone has no signal, can definitely be a hassle. The different language of keyboards, operating systems, and sites could be a huge blocker. First time I sat down at a keyboard in a cafe in Spain and went, they moved letters. Why are there extra? I already have this letter. So it confused me for a while, and at that point, my high school level Spanish was, I thought, more than sufficient. So here we have a young woman sitting in front of a beat up computer at a beat up tiny desk in a tiny austere room, tile floor, and look at those turquoise walls. It's gorgeous. She's writing in a notebook while looking at the screen. So like I said, this scenario might not be very common anymore, but this is a thing that I know I've experienced, and some of you might have. Once when I spoke at a conference in a foreign country, they asked me to use their computer, and I looked at it and I laughed because I'm like, what is this? Are these letters? Then I ran back to the green room where I got my computer. Actually, it was much easier. I didn't run over, I didn't flee. I mean, I did. Anyway, that country was Australia. So your hippo might be fit and unharmed and extremely focused. Those are the worst, by the way. Maybe even capable. That's alarming. Sometimes they have to present a project, though, to someone who is even more important than they are, or to their parents or their grandparents. So just as sometimes you would have to act as tech support when you visit your family on the holidays. They may need to act as tech support when they're giving this demo, especially if the person getting the demo has a permanent, temporary, or situational impairment, whether or not they acknowledge it. So this elderly couple crowded at a computer in mismatched chairs. They might not represent the typical boardroom demo, but the outcomes might not be too far off for your hippo. Other than having to change the printer toner, I understand that doesn't happen in offices that much anymore. So one of the exercises I'd like us to do later on our own, together, whatever, is to come up with user stories for our hippos or our stakeholders, or even arguably ourselves. To do that, we need to make them, or us, into personas, and we want those personas to incorporate temporary or situational disabilities. But they need to map to disabilities. And they need to be folded in naturally. Otherwise, it could feel like a trap, and some hippos are wily. Those accidents that you were not supposed to have set up for them, now they're onto you. I told you not to do that. I have a very simple list that any professional would arguably laugh at, but I think we're all friends here, and you're already laughing, so cool. So broadly, we're going to make, I want us to think about selfish personas. I have these terrible, terrible questions. I tried to do a who, what, where, when, why, how thing. So who's a persona based on? What is that person's interest or priorities? Where does that person go? When does that person do or go? Why is that person doing or going? I was really struggling partway through here if it's not obvious. How does that person typically do or go? I really wrote that. This is obviously an oversimplification, grossly so I would say. This is really only the first step. But if it's your first time making a persona, there's a handy reference that's available for you by Sarah Horton and Whitney Quesenberry from a book they wrote in 2014. Web for Everyone, Designing Accessible User Experiences. Rosenfeld Media still sells that. It's a great read, it's very useful. It has predefined disabled personas that you can use as a guide. But if you don't have a budget for the book, because DEIA budgets are getting cut everywhere, the personas are available for free online at UX Mag. And there are 8 of them, just waiting for you to take them. I'm using descriptors here that were provided in those personas, just to give you a sense of what the 8 are. Let's see, there's, I scrolled. A high school student with autism, a woman with cerebral palsy living independently, a blind guy who's a bit of a geek, someone living with fatigue and pain, another who is deaf and an ASL speaker, a global citizen with low vision, a bilingual mobile phone user, and a grandmother with macular degeneration. So those personas are very much anchored on disabilities, but they have a pretty good range of crossover, disability types, experiences, preferences, and so on. So they're a great baseline for exploring stacked and variable disabilities, or at least I think so, as well as day-to-day needs. Those two up there, I know you can't read them. They're just to show you what they look like. So I made a persona for me. It's loosely based on the examples from the book. So these bullets, yeah. Middle-aged white American male, undergrad degree, consulting career, ability, because they broke them down by ability, aptitude, and attitude. So for ability, monolingual, sometimes has RSI, gluten is a problem. For aptitude, proficient, that's what I like to tell myself. Willing to learn, probably a lie. Quick to dismiss when there is a hassle. And attitude, impatient but will power through. And then for assistive technologies that I use captions, I use dark mode, I use larger type. I have stylus, so I set custom CSS on websites, not because I need it, but because I resent their decisions. This slide doesn't include additional notes that we would typically want to include in a persona, because it's very high level. It doesn't note how much I travel. It doesn't note how I travel, where I spend my free time, how my office is set up, my technology preference. It leaves out a bunch of stuff. For context, there is a photo of me here. I'm wearing a red leather full head mask with mesh eyes. Instead of a nose or a mouth, the leather extends into thick barbed tentacles down to my chest. I'm wearing a navy blue shirt, has tiny octopode on it, and the background is a white wall with two bloody handprints on either side of and just above my head. And I'm wearing a black KN95 under that mask because I believe in safety first. Now, if we were going to write user stories, we would define the user, the desired outcome from the user, and the value. So the format is generally, as user, or the persona that you've chosen to run with, I want outcome. I want particular outcome. As user, I want outcomes, so that value. In order to get value as user, I want outcome. So it's really defining the user, the outcome, and the value. Again, the personas are the first step of defining that user. So here's a selfish user story. It's a very, very simple sample. As a user on a sunlit patio, I want to be able to read the content and see the controls. Add beer, and as a user, I also might have trouble focusing. This might correspond to the stakeholder or hippo who works from the country club. These folks might only check messages or use internal tools after the 9th hole, after they've already had a few drinks on the course and taken 6 or 7 mulligans and so on. This user story might resonate with them, and it might make it easier to get support for better contrast and larger target sizes. And the reason I use the golf course example is because I had a client where the CEO liked to review things from the golf course. Like I did the first 12 holes. How many are there in golf? I don't know. I did the first 13 holes, and now I'd like to sit down and see if my team are accomplishing the things I told them to do. And then he would log in, and if something looked wrong, he would freak out. One of the things that he found wrong, we identified at some point, was just because of the contrast, because the sun was on his screen. I think he was drunk, but that's a different thing. So that's a sample selfish user story. Another one. As a user in bed with a sleeping spouse, I want to watch a training video in silence so that I can get caught up at work. Also, as a user who doesn't want to get punched for having slacked off at work. That might be your hippo again, I don't know. Maybe a manager has to hit metrics for their team going through a mandatory training, but nobody could do it in the open office plan because it's too loud. Because open office plans, they're renowned for being lovely and quiet and private. So this could be a case to ensure captions are included by default. If your person is not hitting those if their teams aren't hitting those training numbers, why aren't they hitting it? What's the barrier? Is it because they can't do it because it's too loud at work and then trying to access at home is a problem, etc.? So what's the use case here that maps to the selfish goal, to that metric, to that other thing? Third one. This one might be less realistic for people higher in an organization, partly because first class is a thing I hear. In order to click links as a user with no elbow room in coach class with a tiny trackpad, I want click areas to be large enough and adequately spaced. Similarly, as a user in coach class who also paid too much for the drink he's spilling on his keyboard. Yeah. Anyway, we're back here to larger target sizes again. And we could also potentially fold in contrast concerns if the person in the next seat has the reading light on or the shade is open and the sun is blasting through the window and lighting up the screen. If it's a train, larger text is also easier to read through all the bouncing. I take Amtrak a lot, and it's like riding a pogo stick. Very interesting. I like what they're doing, but only good if you're making shakes. And then back again to captions for videos, because you might not be able to put your headphones in, or they might not stay in on the train or on the plane. And then if you add in all the distractions of drink carts, fighting over armrests, delays for flights, Newark, you have cognitive factors as well. And so these are the kinds of things that stack up. And again, if you're solving for these, you're arguably solving for the corresponding disabilities as well. Selfish user story number 4. This one might be a bit odd now that some corporations have mandated return to office, but I'm going to run with it anyway. As a user distracted by the television, I want clear headings and labels so that I don't lose my place. And now that people are back in the office, it could be as a user distracted by the fact that there's a line for the microwave or the bank of microwaves and they're always beeping. And why won't it stop, please, end the beeping? You know, you want to be able to not lose your place, or turn off Price is Right if you're working from home. Please have your pet spayed or neutered. So this acknowledges the cognitive load of distractions, which are a very real thing in nearly any workplace. I have a guy who pulls out the weed whacker as soon as I get on a call with my boss. I mean, that's what I tell him. So we're back to plain language, captions, maybe transcripts, very clear and simple layouts. These are the kinds of affordances that we generally know from accessibility that scale well for the rest of our audience. Okay, the good news is I'm almost done. And this is the last major section of this talk. The best part is it's also the briefest. Very brief. And it's about you. When I say you, I mean the digital accessibility practitioner, not specifically Chi, because that would be unfair. So if you currently feel a little disheartened by the current political chaos, like I think most of us do, and if you feel powerless to affect change in your organization or the world or wherever, because your role as a practitioner is already a de facto path to burnout, because that is a very real thing in the industry, and that's even before we roll in things like federal pettiness. What can you do for you? And I think the simplest act is defiance, and the simplest act of defiance is doing your job. Lainey Feingold at CSUN, she had a bunch of great quotes, but this one really stuck with me. Staying the accessibility course is resistance right now. It's that simple. Keep doing the work. That is a form of resistance. And I understand that that might not be a motivator for everybody here, but it's helping me out, mostly because I like being a thorn in somebody's side, everybody's side, if I can swing it. It's a hobby. So think about that. Doing the work is the way that you are resisting, and holding the line as other things might be falling apart around you. It's dire. I know it sounds terrible, but just staying in the fight is important as long as you can. Certainly don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. That's also terrible. So what I have here is I've left time, I don't know because I can't do math, to have a discussion about the tactics that you might use or that you might already use, so that we can maybe, as a group, brainstorm some other scenarios. The idea being here that maybe we can leave here with a list of some options or some tactics that we could tailor to our own needs, maybe informed by the things I covered. Maybe the stuff I said was so egregiously wrong that you have a better way to do it. That's okay. I'm not claiming to have the answers for these things. Mostly I'm trying to give a framing on which maybe you could build, and if the framing's terrible, maybe it's motivated you to come up with a better framing, a better set of tactics. Maybe you have ideas for a better selfish business case, or maybe better ideas for selfish personas or something else completely different. Maybe you have your own selfish motivations that you use to keep with the work. So mostly I'd like to gather those. I want to throw this last slide up though, because I want you to be able to grab that QR code so you can scan it and get the links that are on this thing. And the URL is rosel.li/accessu-selfish2025. So that's rosel.li/accessu-selfish2025. It has the links to the resources that I've discussed throughout the talk. Grab them as you see fit. And this is the part where I really like to hear from everybody else. And if you don't have things you want to contribute, that's okay too. If you came here hoping for a quick answer, cool. You know, maybe somebody else will have an idea. So would anybody like to toss anything out before I start calling on James?
Well, just a quick thing, there is an ice cream truck out there, if it hasn't been emptied out already.
They put an ice cream truck out during my talk.
Yes. Sorry about that.
What the? What? And they didn't bring me any? What? Are they doing it again tomorrow?
It's still there?
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to judge you if y'all want ice cream. There were some aspects of this that were pretty heavy, so just don't feel bad if you want to get ice cream. But if you want to chat, we're here. I'm going to put James on the spot unless somebody else wants to speak up.
I'm lactose intolerant, so would it be weird if I went to get ice cream?
They have non-dairy options. But
Oh, okay.
questions, please raise your hand so we can use the mic.
I have a microphone. Yes. No, I mean, it seemed better than throwing it at her.
Please don't throw. I just wanted to mention the opera singer is actually English as a second language person. Because I wanted to shout it out at the time, but just so you know for future. That's why they've got the weird speech bubble that's AI automated. So, as for personas, when it comes to the hippo persona, sometimes it's more about selling it to them so that they don't have to be bothered by you anymore. So that when they're on the 9th hole at the golf course, they're not having to look at another email from Adrian telling them what to do. So you sell it to them by saying, if you agree to this, I'll leave you alone. That's a selfish kind of, just my idea anyway.
So to make sure I understand that, basically the asserting you're doing the thing and their failure to disagree is permission? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It's more about selling to them that they don't have to do anything, and you'll give them full credit for what they're doing. And often I find the people up the top, they don't want to know what you're doing or how. They just want to get the credit for the work that's done well. Just going by past experiences.
I like that. So I think that appeals very well to people who are very selfish, is being able to claim credit. And if you're okay with not taking the credit, that can be really effective. I like that. I've seen that model used elsewhere. Okay, I think that's something to build on. Other ideas? Thank you for the correction, by the way, on the opera singer as the second language. I don't, see, this goes back to my point. I don't know everything, but I'm going to act like I do. So other thoughts, feedback, questions, ice cream? Chi. Yes, you can give feedback, Chi.
So no, I know you were trying to keep everything short and all, but I just wanted to ask, you know, like when you were given the use cases, if we can have more interactive types discussion on those. Like you went through them and you described it, and then described like what, you know, type of assistive technology they would be looking for in those situations, and just having us maybe answer or something like that. I don't know if you usually do that.
Better if I had paused for audience participation.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I liked your point about giving tech support to parents. I think I like that the most, and I'm going to steal it. Because I guess I see it as like secondhand selfishness. You know, like even if I think I can dodge the bullet and not have any disabilities ever, I'm going to know people who do, right? And that'll probably be my parents first. It has actually already happened. But I'm just thinking that's like a potential point of leveraging. Like you want accessibility because you will know people who will benefit from accessibility. And that could be a parent who becomes blind or like motor problems, or, you know what I mean? Like in your circle somewhere, sooner or later, No one gets out of here alive, and you're going to benefit from that. And it might not be black and white, right? Like it might not be like a blocker issue. It might be just like somebody becomes depleted, like, if they have a hard to use interface or whatever. But you're much better off if they can do their own grocery shopping, so you don't have to help them with that. So secondhand selfishness is what I'm thinking of leveraging.
I like that. I like that idea of sort of secondhand, because you're being selfish because you don't also want to deal with the hassle later either.
You've got to speak into the mic too.
I put
How
this.
will you do that?
Yeah, I switched. It's lit. My pants are lit, so I assume it works. What?
You just wanted to fiddle with it, didn't you?
I put it where it wanted to go. Who has other questions or feedback?
Everyone wants ice cream.
I know except that guy.
It's not a question. Sometimes I like to give example. Especially if something is more complex, like UI or some application. Imagine someone is using it for the first time. Will they be able to navigate it? So that's something that can be, like if they designed it for someone with cognitive disabilities, it might be helpful as accessibility shortcut. But also sometimes asking those hippos, if you could ask them to open some similar but different application, like, hey, do you know that you know where to go? So they can, feel in their, they can feel how someone might feel in their complex UI as well. What do you think? Is it appropriate to ask those hippos to do something if you can? Like maybe you have other examples.
I think it's always appropriate to ask them to do a thing. I think it's even better if you can make them do the thing in front of a room full of people. But there's a risk to that too, that you could alienate them. So there's always that political, the political capital you want to spend on leading them through the chaos versus, showing them, and I think your point about credit before, so that they can feel like they were successful or something like that. Yes, sir. On my way. Here you go.
Yeah, when you talked about hippos, right? There's one thing I've noticed from a lot of leadership, especially a lot of executives. They have a lot on their plate. They want to be doing things incredibly quickly, right? I have kind of a background in banking, and one of the things that we'd always talk about is no one wants to spend more time than they need to paying their bills, paying an invoice. You can carry that over to a lot of different things that we're doing on our technology, right? So if you sell cognitive accessibility improvements as the less time it takes you to do this one thing, that's more time you can spend on your golf course, on your yacht, whatever you happen to be doing that is selfishly making you happy, you just switch back over to it again.
Yeah, I like that idea of getting them out quickly, like get in, get your task, get out. And there's also something about balancing that against people who want stickiness for customer-facing stuff. Stickiness being a euphemism for trap them with dark patterns or anti-patterns rather, so that they will spend more time and maybe accidentally click an ad. Right. So there's sort of a balance there, and I think your point about if you know that audience very well, and you do because they want to go to the golf course. I like that model of here. We just want to get you out of the office. Please get out of the office. Right. Do the thing.
Have a line.
Yeah, get out of my way.
Right. Quickly.
Other thoughts, things? Okay. Because you don't have to stay.
Okay. Well, sometimes even when speaking about accessibility and setting that it has other benefits, like for instance, making something accessible might also improve SEO or semantic structure within the site.
Yeah, I think the SEO argument is probably like the oldest one, which is both good and bad. Because it's sort of the wrong motivation, but to the whole point I'm making here, so what if it moves the needle?
Exactly.
Yeah. Are there 2 QR codes? Nice. And then the survey. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts, feedback? No is an acceptable answer. Well, yeah. Whatever. All right, well then, go get your ice cream. Thank you for attending.